Clayton County residents tonight?
Well, I thought Clayton County did a wonderful job at just expressing a lot of different interests. We talked to everything from Syria to healthcare and everything in between. So it was wonderful. But one thing I want to express to you is this is probably the most polite crowd I have experienced. Northeast Iowa, thank you for being so hospitable. Even though there might be some disagreements out there, I certainly appreciate the courtesy that was extended.
Senator Ernst, with the with Wellmark and Humana stepping out here in Iowa, how do you feel that gap so Iowans are sure that they have the ability for insurance and the right insurance?
Well, that takes us going back to the drawing board and starting over, because in the current plan with the Affordable Care Act, we see these insurance industries fleeing the exchanges and not offering individual health insurance any longer. That doesn't do anyone any good. So we do need to come up with some reforms, and we need to work very hard on that, because pretty soon Iowans are going to be feeling that hurt, and that's not fair for the public to be suffering through that.
We're seeing reports that the Russians may have known that Syria was going to use a chemical agent on its own people. If that does turn out to be the case, what needs to be the reaction from the United States on that front?
Well, I think Russia was complacent with any sort of knowledge that they might have had about chemical weapons. But the strike that was done, I think, sends that message to Russia that we're not going to tolerate this. And we have a president that's willing to stand up against those types of factions that are willing to do such horrible atrocities against their own populations. So it sends a clear signal to Russia. It sends a message, obviously, to Syria that this is not acceptable, this is not going to be tolerated by the United States or our partners.
From a military perspective, what's the danger to have two massive superpowers like the United States and Russia kind of squaring off against each other now, even if in these kind of proxy situations?
I think we have seen this in the past as well. We went through a Cold War, and I'm not saying we're in a Cold War right now, but I think you need a president that's willing to stand up to President Putin, and I think right now they're going toe-to-toe. And I'm interested to hear the dialogue that comes out of Secretary Tillerson's visit to Russia. I'm really very interested to hear what they're talking about. Are they talking about Syria? Are they talking about the use of weapons of mass destruction? What else can we talk about? Hacking was a topic that was brought up tonight as well. The influence in the election cycle that we had. All of those things need to be discussed, but we need to let Russia know that we are concerned about this and we're willing to do what it takes to stop it.
You talked about the nuclear option. You said Democrats kind of started this in 2013, opened the door for what happened now for the Supreme Court. Do you think it could go to legislation and removing the 60 vote threshold for cloture for that too?
I certainly hope that we don't move that onto the legislative calendar as well when we're dealing with bills that are coming forward. It is the Senate. We want to be that great deliberative body, as it was expressed earlier. So we want to make sure that we're protecting that debate time for those bills, but understanding that who knows what will change in the future. But my hope is that it remains the same.
Going back to healthcare, do you think you guys are going to be able to come up with some kind of solution by the end of the year before open enrollment starts? Obviously, there's a lot of problems. The Iowa Insurance Commissioner said Congress or President Trump really needs to be the one to fix it. But what's the likelihood of you guys by the end of the year maybe coming up with a solution?
I am hoping that we do find a solution. I think what we saw with the attempt earlier, it was pushed through rather rapidly, and not everybody felt that their voice was being heard in trying to correct the Affordable Care Act. So it's back to the drawing board, and hopefully we can come up with some sort of bipartisan legislation that will make it through, be acceptable to the president, but also work for our constituents. We've got a lot of hardworking families across Iowa that simply can't afford the Affordable Care Act, and we tend to forget about those that it's not working for them. They can't afford to go to the doctor even though they're being covered. So we've got to go back. We've got to correct this problem. We've got to make sure that it's working for as many Americans as possible.
You had mentioned that this was one of the nicest crowds that you've had since you've been back doing these town hall meetings. Do you think that is based on the location of where we are, or do you think that it has anything to do with people are getting the message and people are getting their voices heard and people starting to understand more what's going on?
Well, I've had a lot of folks tell me that Northeast Iowa is one of the nicest places to be, but it was a very courteous crowd. Of course, we disagreed on a number of issues, but they were willing to let me talk through what I thought was the issue and what might be a solution. They were allowed to talk through, you know, what their issues were and what they thought were solutions to. So I think that people are, I hope, understanding that I do want to listen to them, and I do truly care, not just about Iowa, but the United States as a whole. And I wish more of our elected representatives were getting out there and hearing what their constituents have to say, because there is a lot of angst out there, a lot of fear, a lot of confusion, and we want to make sure that we're taking that, we're compiling the information, and taking it back to Washington, D.C. and trying to formulate appropriate responses for Iowa and the United States.